lives inside grows deep and wide. No way to hide. Love lives inside.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you, Janet and Hamp. Thank you, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday to you. This Sunday, we're starting a series of lessons honoring the season for peace and nonviolence. And the Season for Peace and Nonviolence, this is the 19th anniversary of the Season for Peace and Nonviolence, and it was actually begun by a number of people, but one of the key people involved in the beginning of the Seasons for Nonviolence is Arun Gandhi, who is the grandson of Mahatma Gandhi. And it actually has been declared a season for nonviolence by the United Nations. And there are a number of actually very well-known peace activists and peace teachers that have participated in and promoted this idea and this understanding of a season for peace and nonviolence. And it celebrates the memorials of Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi. And also it celebrates the awareness and the teachings of the Dalai Lama. It's a time for us to really reflect on and think about what really constitutes and makes for peace in our lives and in our world. And so when I'm thinking about this, I naturally always have to look and find a story that I like to start with. And so I came across this one about a man who said his therapist told him that the best way to achieve true inner peace was to finish what he started. And so he said, today I finished 2 bags of chips and a chocolate cake. I feel better already. Well, unfortunately, that's one of the ways that we have a tendency sometimes to try to find peace inside, isn't it? And it doesn't necessarily work. It's one of those what Marshall Rosenberg calls a catastrophic strategy. And it doesn't really meet the need that we're really looking for. So it's one of the ways that we have of deflecting oftentimes from really establishing ourselves in that peace. There was another story I came across about a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old who presented their mom a beautiful house plant. And they'd used their own money to buy it, and she was just thrilled, you know. And so the older of them said, with kind of a sad face, he says, well, there was a bouquet at the flower shop that we really wanted to give you, and it was really much prettier, but it was way too expensive. But it had a ribbon on it, and you know how you always ask us for a little peace so you can have some rest? This was perfect because it said rest in peace. Well, hopefully, that's not what we have to do in order to experience peace. I don't think it is. I really do think that we are here in our lives and our world to be instruments of peace. Charles Fillmore said, the promise that peace will be restored on earth is older than the Bible. It's part of the prophecy of all the regions of the earth. All regions agree that this condition of peace and happiness will be brought about through causes originally largely with the mind of humankind. And in Isaiah it says, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. Well, as many of you know, this month I celebrated my 31st birthday for the second time. And I reflected on this a number of times in my life, and one of the things that I'm aware of, and sadly aware of, is that there are actually only a few years in my lifetime that I can remember that my country was not at war. Very few. And it brings me great sadness to think about that. We have been in some sort of war or conflict for almost all of my life. From the time I was a child. And from the time I was a child, I've longed for, and I've sought for, and I've worked for, and I've prayed for peace. And I remember as a child watching movies of World War II, and yes, I was one of those guys who played Army, like most of the guys of my time and my age growing up. We all played war. And I remember watching movies about World War I and World War II, and I remember one of them, I forget which one, it was either World War I or World War II, was the war to end all wars. You remember that term? They were going to fight this war to win all wars. And I remember watching the movies, and I thought to myself, well, you know, I was listening to them, and they had always had subtitles, and the Germans would speak, and they had English subtitles. And I always thought, you know, if we really just learned, if we just learned to speak to each other, if we learned each other's language, maybe we wouldn't have to be in conflict with each other. So even years later, I studied German in college and high school because I wanted to know how to communicate. Now, it's not necessarily with Germans or Germany that we have to deal with in that sense anymore, but my thought, my thinking of that time was, and I know that this was a decision that came out of that little child that wanted peace. They wanted to be a part of helping to make peace in the world. I'll be honest with you, I hate war. There's a part of my soul that just shouts inherently that war is not, it's wrong. But I'll be honest with you, I remember on September 11th, and actually maybe once or twice since then, when things have happened that were horrific like that, there's also a part of my soul that shouted out, and I was, I remember for just a short period of time, I was thinking, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go to war. And I think back on it and I look at that time and the response and the reaction that I had to that, and I realized even during that I was participating in the same energy that helped to create that circumstance and the situation in the first place. That I was just jumping in there just like everybody else, saying, hey, we've got to go and take care of this. Now, I'm grateful that I had a background and I had some understanding and some teachings that taught me that this is probably not going to be the way that we establish peace on earth. In fact, I know it's not. So I prayed about it. I prayed for those that were caught in the buildings. I prayed for those who were on the airplanes. I prayed for the people of New York. I prayed for the leaders, that they have the wisdom to be able to know how to respond to such a horror. I prayed for those who committed these horrendous acts. I prayed for their souls, and I prayed that all those who were involved experience peace. I prayed for myself that I might be able to understand how such things can happen. And whenever we've had those kinds of incidences and circumstances, like in Paris, and my work is really about praying for everyone involved, including the perpetrators. Because I do believe that by doing so, we can make a difference. We can shift. And the reason why I say this is because there's something that we need to understand that we don't understand, or at least we think we need to understand. Jesus said, they that live by the sword shall die by the sword. A lesson that seems that we have a difficult understanding of, a difficulty grasping this idea, this understanding that whatever energy we're putting back is what is returned to us. So whoever lives by the sword dies by the sword. Now, the sword is not just a real sword. The sword is a metaphor for whoever takes up and makes a decision using the energies of war, of violence. A decision, that's an interesting word, isn't it? It's a powerful word. Do you know that the word decision literally means to cut in two, to divide? And a sword is a great symbol for making a decision. And whatever decision you're making, you're going to live by that decision or you're going to die by it. And it's true, isn't it? And if we make a decision that is used to harm, to send out pain, to send out hurt in some way, we will receive that back in some form, in some way. It may not come back from exactly the same point. But if we use our ability to decide, to choose, to make a choice, to move in a direction that brings life and wholeness and healing, we become instruments of peace. I, like many of you, have struggled to truly understand how I can be more a part of this, to make some sense of all of these craziness, of the thoughts and feelings that come when we have these horrific experiences. And so I often fall short at times, but I keep returning to this idea, this understanding. You know, you've heard me say, one of the students came to one of the masters and said, "How is it that you're always so centered?" And he said, "Never centered, always returning to center." It is an ongoing process, isn't it? Peace is an ongoing process. Not necessarily peaceful, but always returning to that place of peace. I've believed and understand for many, many years that you cannot create peace in the world with guns, with bombs, with swords. And war doesn't create peace. It only creates more hatred. Violence does not stop violence. It seeds even more violence. What we're sending out is what we're going to get back. Yet, if I'm honest with myself, I spend a lot of time trying to have peace in the world. More time sometimes than trying to have peace within myself. Trying to get the world to be peaceful. Last week I talked about covering the kingdom with cowhide. Remember that story? As you're here, I'll tell that story again very briefly. There was a king who went out into his kingdom, and as he was walking along had stepped on rocks and shells, and they hurt his feet. And so he made a declaration he wanted his whole kingdom covered in cowhide. And the court jester was over in the corner, what they call a court fool, usually the wisest one in the court, was laughing and laughing and laughing and laughing, and the king looked at him and got mad and called the guards to get him and brought him in front of him and says, "You better have a good excuse for this laughter or you're off with your head." And the jester said, "Well, why do you want to cover the kingdom with cowhide?" "Well, because I walked out on my kingdom and it hurt my feet." "Why don't you just cut out a couple of pieces of leather and put it on your feet? Then you don't have to cover your kingdom with cowhide." What a great metaphor and story for all of us. It is really about our lessons, about learning how we ourselves can move into that place. It wasn't until I really came into unity that I discovered and realized that if we're going to have peace in the world, we have to learn to put on our own shoes. We have to learn to put leather on our own feet. We have to learn how to establish that peace within ourselves. We sing it every Sunday, don't we? We sing, "Let there be peace on earth," and let it begin with me. And let it begin with me. That is a powerful part of what unity is about, I believe. Emmett Fox says the true interior state of our soul, of soul peace, was known to the mystics as serenity. They never tired of telling us that serenity is the grand passport to the presence of God. I say oftentimes in our meditation time that we are most open and receptive to knowing and feeling and experience the presence of God when we are in a place of peace. In Scripture we read that all things work together for good for those who love God. So I've been trying to see and understand how September 11th, the other terrorist attacks that we've seen and experienced in our lives and in the world, how the our response in attacking Iraq or other countries, how can work for good. I have to admit that I have a hard time seeing how those kinds of responses are going to help bring peace. I've seen the incredible compassion that American people have with each other, and there's a power in that we need to honor and recognize. I've seen the heroic work of the firefighters, of those who have helped, and even in Paris, those who have helped each other, and for some reason, those times seem somewhat limited, and then very soon after that, there's a cry for violence. I don't quite understand how it is that we can go from those places where we're in an energy of trying to help and then moving out of those energies into trying to hurt. There's a cute story I heard a while back. It's actually a story of at Thanksgiving, actually, and as a grandfather got some turkey giblets hung in one of his dentures, and so his false teeth. So he went to the bathroom and he took out his false teeth and was brushing them, and the young 3 or 4-year-old grandson came along, was following him along, and watched him do this, took his teeth out. He just laughed. He thought that was the funniest thing. He just laughed and laughed and laughed, and he said, and the grandfather popped him back in. He said, "Do it again, Grandpa." So he popped it out again, and he just laughed and laughed and laughed, thought that was the funniest thing, and then put it back in. "Do it again, Grandpa." Did this about 3 or 4 times. He says, "Now, take off your nose." See, I thought this was just a cute story, but I realized that there's something here. There's a lesson here. There are things that we see that we don't always understand. I think on a human level, we have difficulty sometimes understanding experiences like this. We're kind of like that 3 or 4-year-old. We're not sure that what we're seeing is what we're seeing. We think that what we're seeing perhaps is something else. And we oftentimes confuse what we're seeing as reality. But the reality is that, as Eric Berthelworth says, we don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are. And so I'm going to throw out here something for you, that everything that we look at and see out here in the world is a reflection of something that is emanating from within us. Everything that we see and experience out here in the world is a reflection of something that is emanating from within us. It's emanating from a belief system that we have, thoughts that we hold, energies and emotions that we hold, judgments that we make, blessings that we give. Everything that we see and experience out in the world in some way is reflected back to us from the energies that we are emanating, that we are presenting, that we are allowing to move through us, that we are deciding for, that we are making a choice and a decision for. We've been told that there will be wars and rumors of wars in the world, but we can also participate in shifting the energies around us. Everything that we are participating in is in some way participating in and helping to generate and to create something out here in the world. Now, peaceful does not necessarily mean passive, does it? Sometimes we're being called to be actively passive. Gandhi and Martin Luther King were great examples of being actively passive, weren't they? We have an important part to play in establishing peace in the world. Gandhi called his peaceful resistance movement Satyagraha. It's a great term, Satyagraha, and it literally means soul force. It's been translated as passive resistance, non-resistance, but the literal translation is soul force. Is using the power and the energy of our true nature, of our soul, of our divine being, to bring forth and establish more of that energy of light and love. It's a movement within us from the divine, moving and expressing out into the world. Dr. King said, nonviolence is in the truest sense, is not a strategy that one uses simply because it's expedient at the moment. Nonviolence is ultimately a way of life that men live because of the sheer morality of its claim. The sheer morality of its claim. The Hindi word namaste, which we sometimes use here in Unity in the Heart of Austin, it's literally translated, I salute and honor the divinity in you. In Unity we say, I behold the Christ in you, oftentimes. It's an important and powerful part of our ability to participate in creating and establishing peace in our lives and in the world. Came across this quote today, as a matter of fact, when I was preparing some thoughts about our lesson. Abraham says, if you want to be of greatest value to others, see them as you know that they want to live. If you want to be of greatest value, see them as they would want to live. Rather than seeing them as we think they should be, or how we want them to be, see them with their possibilities and their potential that they can establish and live for themselves. And Charles Fillmore, the co-founder of Unity, said, peace and harmony, tranquility are derived from an awareness of the Christ consciousness. So each week we do sing a wonderful song that I love, and I think many of you do as well, Let There Be Peace on Earth, and Let It Begin With Me. And so if we want to establish peace on earth, we do need to take the opportunity, the time, to practice being at peace and allowing ourselves not just to be at peace, but choosing and making decisions that bring about a greater experience and sense of peace in the world, establishing peace within our own being. And so in a moment, we're going to move into a time of meditation, and our meditation is going to be a little different. Before I get into that, I wanted to actually share a couple other things here, though. Our meditation is going to be an active meditation. Before we leave here today, you're going to be invited to participate in being an instrument of peace, not only here, but in life, in our world. In John 14:27, Jesus said, peace I leave with you. My peace I give unto you, not as the world gives, give I unto you. Let not your heart be troubled, and neither let it be afraid. A part of our work is to participate in the very act of being peace in the world. Not always easy, is it? We find ourselves oftentimes reacting to circumstances, situation, and people in our lives that's not really necessarily peaceful, guilty, you know. Again, but it is a spiritual practice, and that's part of what we understand and teach in Unity, is to continually work with these understanding, these ideas in practical ways, to put them to work in ways that help us to experience more of who and what we are. What I got in my shower when I was preparing this morning is that the very act of seeing the presence of God in another is the very act of being the presence of God for another. When we take the time to really consider and meditate on and reflect on and make it an active meditation of looking for and finding that presence, that light within those in our lives, in our world, within each other, we're actually allowing that light to shine through that very experience and through that very light. We will begin to see the peace in the world when we are choosing to look for and see that presence within each other. And in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 7, of the increase of his government and peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and upon his kingdom, to order it and to establish it with judgment and with justice from henceforth, even for forever. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will perform this. Today, you're going to be invited to participate in an active meditation for peace. And so I'd like to invite us to go ahead and begin to prepare for our meditation time. And we're going to go ahead and have a song. We're going to prepare for our meditation time, but for a moment, while we're listening to the song, take a moment to get yourself centered and clear. And I'm not going to lead you in meditation, but in a moment, we're going to stand, those who wish to participate, we're going to stand and we're going to do an active meditation. Now, if you'd like to participate in our active meditation today, what I'll ask you to do is stand up and form a big circle around the room. And those of you who would prefer to sit, you can do it. You can do this actually sitting as well, and that's fine. And so what I'll ask you to do, those of you who are in the circle, you can connect up if you want to, but we're going to disconnect in just a moment and reconnect. So I'm going to start off, and we're going to count off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So I'm going to count 1 and
2. 1, 2, 1, 2.
So what I'd like to ask you to do is all of the 1s stay where you are, and all of the 2s step forward at least a foot. And then now turn and face one of the 1s. Find a partner, basically. Line up with somebody. There we go. And our meditation today, there we go. Excellent, thank you. So what you're going to be asked to do is look into the other person's eyes and affirm and say, I behold the Christ in you, or I see God in you, or I see the divine in you. I see the light of God in you. Whatever phrase it really speaks to you about seeing the divine in this other person. And really hold that thought and energy and smile when you do so. Because there's something about a smile that really conveys that sense and that feeling. And then as soon as you've done that, I'll ask the 2s to step to your right, and the 1s will stay put. Fair enough? And you'll go to the next person, and we'll just do that, and I think we'll be able to get around the whole circle this morning. So let's just begin by seeing, so we'll say it to each other for that matter. Let's start with the 1s saying it to the 2s, and then the 2s responding back the same. Everybody understand what we're doing? Any questions? Awesome. I behold the Christ in you. Next. And let's just do this rather quickly. It doesn't need to be a long thing. I behold the presence of God. Okay, while they're finishing up, I would like to ask all of the 1s to make a circle around here, and all the 2s to make a circle around there. Over there. All the 1s on the right, on my right, and all the 2s over on the left, and make a circle around these chairs. And if you have to go through the chairs, that's okay also. Did you get a chance to say Okay. Did you get a chance? All right. So I'm going to start here, and actually, Julie, will you start with 1? And we're going to count off again. And I'm going to be 1, and you'll be? So we're not going to be able to get everybody around, but I want to get a few more opportunities. So let's go ahead and have a seat now, if you would. And thank you for participating. You can do more of this after, by the way. So that's our meditation for the week. And that's our meditation, that's your homework for the week as well. As you go through your week, you don't necessarily, if you don't feel comfortable saying it to the person, at least say it within yourself. And every person that you go through the week seeing and experiencing, if you will affirm this for them, you'll be amazed at the shifts that begin to happen in the energy in all of your life experiences, especially in doing it with those people who tend to push our buttons. What a great exercise, huh?